Today, we welcome to the show Mr. Eric Deggans. Eric Deggans has over 20 years of experience in journalism, where he is currently NPR's first full-time TV media critic and the author of Race Baiter, How the Media Wields Dangerous Words to Divide a Nation, which is a look at how prejudice, racism, and sexism fuels some elements of modern media. Deggans served as chair of the Media Monitoring Committee for the National Association of Black Journalists and sat on the board of directors to the National Television Critics Association and the Mid-Florida Society of Professional Journalism. Deggans was named as one of Ebony Magazine's Power 150 in 2009, and in 2013, he was awarded in Florida Press Club's first ever diversity award and the National Association of Black Journalists, Arts and Entertainment TAS Force Legacy Award. Among other great works, notoriety and accolades continue.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you really don't have to do all that. You really don't have to do all that. You know, it's funny, when I heard the name of your podcast, I just read it as Issa Rap. I thought you were like a tribute to like Issa Rae or so. I was like, that's cool. I can go talk about Insecure.
Yeah, we can do that too. Because we love Insecure. We talk about it. Yeah.
This is all Black film, Black media, Black culture. You know, we want to recognize those things that we love and we enjoy. As you see with our shirts. Mm-hmm.
I see.
My favorite movie, The Color Purple. Mm-hmm. Before we get started into the interview, we're curious to know, like,
everything you do gonna fail.
Till you do right, dummy. That's how I feel about racism in this country.
You're a woman. You're black. You're not anything.
Oh,
I may be black. I may even be ugly. But I'm here. It's not a day go by. We say that all the time. It's not a day go by that we don't quote The Color Purple.
It's so many. It's like a quote for everything in that movie.
Everything.
I feel everything. Everything. I'm at work.
Oh, wait a minute. Actually, I said it wrong. It was, you're a woman. You're black. You're nothing at all.
You did that so well. Danny Glover ain't got nothing on you.
I felt that.
Danny Glover ain't got nothing on you. I promise you. That was wonderful.
I felt that.
Thank you.
Did you know that is that your that's what you wanted to be, low key actor?
Actor. Yeah.
No. It's you watch so much of this stuff that after a while it just starts to stick in your head. And so, like, sometimes, you know, and like especially, you know, Danny Glover was so good in that movie, and along with the cat who played his dad, who was also in A Soldier Story. Like, I love those actors who have that experience and they also have that vocal technique and that presence, and so that, you know, it sticks with you, you know.
Wow. How did you get into like journalism or being a media critic, TV critic? Like, how did that come about?
Yeah, it's really weird. So I when I was a kid, I had this idea. I got to figure out like what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to make money? Like, what's my thing going to be? Mm-hmm. And I was good at three things. I was good at art. I was good at writing, and I was a music. I still am a musician, a drummer, bass player, and a vocalist. So it was like, how do I figure out how to make all that into something where I could get a regular paycheck? Mm-hmm. And you know, I wasn't as good at art as I was as the other two things, so I put that to the side. And my dad was a newspaper columnist amongst like all the other things that he did. You know, he was a typical hardworking brother. He had like 4 or 5 jobs, but one of the things he did was a newspaper column. And I thought, you know, if I could become a music critic, then I could use what I know about music, and I could use writing, and I could get a regular paycheck from a newspaper. So I sort of aimed myself at that through high school and through college. And when I was in college, I was in a band that was signed to Motown. So I took 2.5 years off, made a record with them, toured with them a little bit. We played in Japan and stuff. And when that ended, Motown was sold to MCA and they dropped almost everybody on the label. When that ended, I went back to journalism, finished my degree, and became pointed myself towards being a music critic. And I did that for probably about 5 or 6 years. And I started to realize that there are a few music critics who can constantly stay relevant and do a great job talking about pop music, no matter how old they get. But for most of us, it's a young person's game. And this is gonna really date me, but I was getting to the point where I had to review Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera and Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, and I just couldn't stand it. And so it made me decide that I should do something else. I should do something where my age wouldn't be a liability. And I realized that like everything happens on television. So if you want to write about social movements, if you want to write about gender, if you want to write about race, politics, whatever, even music, it's all happening on television. So I shifted over to covering television and media, and that was in 1997. And I just, have kept it going. And when you also talk about race in that context, there's a wealth of material, and it's also always relevant. It's always relevant because media is always going to struggle with racial issues the same way America does. It's going to reflect our struggle. It's going to be a catalyst for those struggles. And describing that, talking about that, is really telling the story of America's attempt and the world's attempt to sort of come to terms with all these ideas about race and culture. So once I hit on that idea of talking about race and society and media all in one thing, it was just like, well, this is my life's work now.
Wow. You had like tons of jobs. I like to get back on that drummer. Like,
Sure.
You're a professional drum, like you drum professionally.
Georgia Japan, Motown.
I still do it. And it's funny because when I was in college, I went to Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, Southern Indiana, and there was this cadre of musicians. And if I told you all the people that these folks are playing with now, it would freak you out. Like the lead singer in my band is the main background singer with Burt Bacharach now. The guitar player in my band writes songs for Charlie Wilson and Johnny Gill, and has worked with Babyface and Leanne Rimes and all these great people. The keyboard player for my band played with Little Richard and LL Cool J. And a drummer who's a friend of mine, we used to sub for each other on gigs. He's the drummer for Saturday Night Live and has been for almost 20 years. So I thought that's how every college was. that if you got in with the cool musicians, you would be hanging out with these guys. Like the players that were just a year or two ahead of me are these guys. One's a guitar player with Steely Dan. One's a keyboard player who played with Miles Davis and Wynton. One's a bass player who's played with Wynton and was in the Tonight Show band for a while and all that. And so we just thought like that's how it was. And we didn't realize that this was like a special environment where quality players were inspiring each other and teaching each other. So I took lessons with Kenny Aronoff, this guy who's John Cougar Mellencamp's drummer. He plays with John Fogerty now. He's played with everybody. He's a studio legend. He's played with Smashing Pumpkins and Bob Seger and all these heavy people. And so when you're in that environment, you can't help but excel. You can't help but play at your top level. And so we had these bands. There were 3 funk bands in that town, if you can believe it. 3 funk bands in a Southern Indiana town, and it was like Purple Rain. It was like we were all competing against each other for gigs and stuff like that.
That's great. And I don't know bands. I'm sorry, but only thing Indiana is Gary, Indiana, where Jackson.
That's where I'm from.
So I didn't know music came from. I mean,
yeah. Well,
the Jackson 5.
Well, I'm from Gary, and the Jacksons lived about 3 blocks from where my grandmother lived. But Babyface is from Indianapolis, and they had this band called The Deal that was like again, like maybe 3, 4, 5 years before my band. They were like amazing. amazingly popular in Indianapolis, and then they went to LA, and Babyface, exploded. And so yeah, they're, and on the rock side, John Cougar Mellencamp is from Indiana, and this guy named Henry Lee Summer, who you may know, is also from Indiana. There was a lot, especially during that time. There was a lot, and this guy John Cougar, he had a studio in Southern Indiana, and he brought in REM, he brought in the Bangles, he brought in all these heavy artists, and then they would hang out in the town that we lived in, Bloomington, Indiana, when they were recording. So we got to meet them. They would come see our shows sometimes, and we could, just kind of hit them up for tips or whatever, And it was a really interesting kind of musical stew where sort of rock people and funk people were all kind of hanging out, and then we went out into the world and tried to make our mark. And a lot of people from that scene, I could pull up records. The guy who did sound for my band the first year we were together was David Bowie's musical director in 2000. A guy who was a lead singer in a competing band of ours, good friend, is now singing with Bon Jovi. He sung with Bruce Springsteen. He was in the original cast of Stomp. I mean, there's just so many really talented people from that time, that mid 80s time at Indiana University that really went on to do some cool stuff.
Wow. So you have this ear for music. How do you think music plays a big part in movies? Does it kind of maybe make or break a movie, or kind of add more?
Oh yeah.
Structure?
Music can be another character, of course. Music can set a scene, of course. Music can also provide subtext. Music can be a counterpoint. So you can be watching a scene that's very tense, and if the music is a counterpoint in an interesting way, that can add a lot. I just, by coincidence, yesterday I was watching this Netflix documentary about David Foster, and I don't know if you know who he is, but he's like a superstar producer who has worked with everybody from Whitney Houston to he did why am I blanking on her? I'm blanking on her name. He's worked with everybody, and he was talking about doing the Bodyguard soundtrack, and Quincy Jones came to him when he got the job and said, "This is going to be the most significant project of your career." And this guy had he produced all the Earth, Wind, and Fire stuff that he produced all of it. He'd already done a lot of really heavy stuff, and the story he told was, "I Will Always Love You." That starts with just Whitney singing, and David Foster didn't want it to start that way. He wanted it to start with music, and because it was in a movie, Kevin Costner was heavily involved in having Whitney involved and in picking the songs that were going to be a part of the project. And he insisted that it start with her singing because it worked as a dramatic moment in the film. And Clive Davis, the head of Arista Records, also heard the song and said, "It sounds great like that. You have to keep it like that." And in the doc, they talk about how they got into an argument where David Foster was cursing him out on the phone because he's like a notoriously intense guy. And eventually Clive Davis said, "Look, I'm the head of the record company. We are doing it this way." And it's the classic song that and you can't even imagine it now with not starting with her singing it that way. Exactly.
Yeah,
so that shows how having a song in a film can affect how the song is actually constructed, because you do it a certain way so that it works in the dramatic moment, and then you find out, hey, it makes it a better song too. So that's when it really works, that's how it's supposed to work.
Favorite soundtrack of all time?
Oh man, well, favorite soundtrack of all time. Because I had to distinguish the coolest soundtracks. It's hard to find a soundtrack where the whole soundtrack is good. I'll put it that way. Like the Shaft soundtrack, if you've actually tried to listen to it, Shaft is great. That song is great. I don't know that I can listen to the whole record. Superfly I
Yeah,
love that.
the
I love that
Curtis
soundtrack.
Mayfield, is that
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's got, Superfly and Freddie's Dead, and it's got some really
yeah.
cool stuff on it. I would say like the coolest album that's a soundtrack that was not created as a soundtrack is What's Going On. Because if you watch The Five Bloods, Spike Lee's movie, it's basically the soundtrack for the movie. And if you don't know the album What's Going On, when you watch
Marvin
Five
Gaye was
Bloods,
going on?
yeah, Marvin Gaye is What's Going On. Because Marvin Gaye, the thing about that album was that Marvin wanted to do a socially relevant record, and he decided he wanted to do a socially relevant record about all these brothers that were coming home from Vietnam, like severely damaged. And Barry Gordy, who was running Motown at the time, was still focused on trying to make commercial records that white people would be comfortable with. And so he did not want one of his biggest stars to go off and make this, social statement record. And Marvin did it anyway and insisted that it be released, and they had a real fight over it. And it turns out he was right. And when you listen to that record, you can see in songs like Inner City Blues and What's Going On, and all the different interludes, that it's constantly about trying to describe how these guys who were changed by the Vietnam experience come back to America and then try to deal. And so The Five Bloods is about all these Black Vietnam vets who go back to Vietnam for a specific purpose, but they really wound up having to confront the legacy of what they did over there. And so Spike uses a ton of great music from that record in the film. And it feels like What's Going On was a soundtrack that was written for The Five Bloods like 30 years before it actually, before the film was actually made. It's really something.
It makes you think like Spike is so talented. Like he just
well, Spike. I mean, a lot of talented people, and you find this out when you've been covering entertainment for a long time, like I have. Like there are talented people who are brilliant, but it also creates blind spots, and so that drive and that belief in their instincts that leads them to do things that nobody else would do also leads them to not listen to people when they say this is a problem. And so I feel that way about Spike sometimes. Like he does amazing work, but his blind spots are big enough to drive a truck through, and it's hard to. I mean, I think he's just decided his process is to move forward creatively, and if there's a blind spot, other people can deal with it. But Black Klansman, I like that movie, but there was a lot of problems with it. It was a problematic movie, and Boots Riley wrote this great essay about how problematic it was. I love Do the Right Thing, and people are going back to it now because it was so prescient, and Malcolm X. But Jungle Fever is a movie that really bothers me, and I think he had a lot of stereotypes and a lot of preconceptions about interracial relationships that movie reinforces. And I'm just kind of sad to see. I love the stars of the movie, and I was sad to see them kind of stranded in a movie that didn't make sense, because Spike was trying to create a movie that reflected all of these weird ideas that he had about interracial relationships, and it didn't make any sense, and the characters didn't make any sense. So I love Spike, but I think he does have his shortcomings.
I'm glad you talked about that, because as Black creators, like, white supremacy is embedded into the fabric of our lives. So how can we create consciously but also freely without putting those problems or our embedded supremacy?
That's very hard. That's very hard. And I think, what's interesting to me, like if you watch the evolution of Black images on television, what you see is an attempt, especially once we hit the 80s and the 90s, and Black people are actually increasingly in charge of TV shows and films, is that you see Black people trying to figure out how to tell their stories and hold all the white supremacy nonsense at bay. And it's not something that is easy to figure out. I mean, white-centered movies and TV have had 5 decades, 6 decades, 8 decades to figure out how they tell stories, right?
Yeah.
So what we're seeing, the kind of movies we're seeing now, are the product of decades of trial and error, things working, things not working, people being inspired, and advancing the form. And so when Black people come along, or people of color come along, or women come along, and they say, hey, we want to create something that's sort of free of the racist elements, or free of the white supremacist elements, or free of the male-centered misogynistic elements in this tradition, you have to figure out how to do that. And it takes, unless you're a genius like Spike Lee, it takes time to figure that out. And so I think now, like the Black-centered shows we're getting now, the Atlantas, the Insecures, the A Black Lady sketch show, the P-Valleys, the David Makes Mans, the shows we're getting now are the fruits of all of that experimentation and trial and error, and how do we get past this, and how do we get past this, and now we're really just getting stuff that's amazing.
Yeah. I agree, because I feel like when I was growing up, like, people, it was like really lazy, not lazy,
not well thought out, or
not good character development with
Right.
Especially with people of color, especially like I think when John Singleton did Boys in the Hood, everybody just ran with just gangsters shooting up movies. Like, it was like, okay, that's Hollywood said, okay, that worked. Let's keep on creating these same movies.
Yeah, but not thinking about the intentionality of why he created it and how he came to that film of Boys in the Hood.
Well, and so you had this sort of clump of Black filmmakers in him and Matty Rich, who were inspired by what Black folks were going through in these deprived urban areas, right? And so they were creating these singular films, and then Hollywood sees that Boys in the Hood becomes this huge success, and Inkwell, I think, was an independent film that got sold for a lot of money from one of those film festivals. I think maybe I'm probably misspeaking, but for some reason I want to say it sold at Sundance for a lot or something. But those movies are successful, and then all of a sudden Hollywood says, oh well, Black people like gangster movies, and then we get 50 of them, and it's interesting, like at that time, especially, white filmmakers could come and say, I've been inspired by Kurosawa, and I want to put that together with a coming of age movie in Southern California, and we get this, and Hollywood goes, oh, hey, that's interesting. A Black filmmaker tries to do that, and they go, look, Black people are watching gangster movies. Why don't you make one of those? and so again, what I think is important about this moment is that Black filmmakers and Black creators of TV are now saying, I'm going to create a comedy show, and you can watch it, and you can see that there's a callback to Dave Chappelle's show, or the Chris Rock show, or even Richard Pryor. But when you watch that, you will also see callbacks to Monty Python, or you'll see callbacks to SCTV, or you'll see callbacks to The Thick of It. A British comedy. We are now allowed to bring all these artistic inspirations that we have that are outside of the realm of whatever society says Black culture is, and make new things that are rooted in Black culture. And that, to me, is what's really exciting. We don't so much have TV outlets or movie studios saying you can't do that because it won't be marketable. Because we have so many shows now. Atlanta kind of busted something open by showing you can put an absurdist, what do I want to say? Absurdist kind of non-logical imagery inside a very grounded, authentic TV comedy, and people will watch it. It will be successful. Black people will accept it, and white people will want to watch it too. And then Donald Glover comes out with the This Is America video and takes that to another level. And now Hollywood sees, he's proven, he's replicated that success. So, when Robin Thede comes up with a Black Lady sketch show, and there's elements of it that are just incredibly grounded and authentic, and then there's elements of it that are just incredibly magical and crazy, they don't balk. HBO doesn't balk. HBO puts it on the air, and it gets nominated for an Emmy. So I think we're in a lot of ways, we're in a very cool moment. We just have to keep pressing to make sure that it keeps going.
Okay. What are your thoughts on the Emmy nominations? We have a lot of African Americans nominated, a lot of good shows that are nominated. Do you think Hollywood is caught up, or is it because of all the protests and
I have very mixed feelings about it, because on the one hand, it's an unprecedented level of diversity in terms of Black nominees. I've never seen so many Black people nominated for Emmys, and I've been covering television since 1997.
Wow.
There was a category, I think, supporting actor in a comedy, where 5 of the nominees are Black, which is like, I've never seen that. So on one level, that's amazing. Now voting for the Emmys took place in like the first 2 weeks of July, and that's right when a lot of the racial reckoning and controversy over George Floyd's death happened. He was killed on May 25th. And voting for the Emmys was the first 2 weeks of July. Or first 2 weeks of June, maybe? No, July. We were seeing, we'd already seen, Live PD get canceled, and Cops get canceled, and other shows apologize for what they were doing, and so this whole steamroller thing was already very top of mind for Hollywood when the Emmy voting went underway. And I think they realized there was no way they could have an Emmy so white they would get killed. So I think there's certainly that in it. Now, the other thing that bothers me is that because so many, I don't want to say because. On the one hand, we had a ton of Black folks get the recognition they have so sorely deserved. On the other hand, Latin performers and show creators were virtually shut out. And it was terrible. Because they, Latinx creators and performers are also having something of a mini renaissance. And there are shows like Gentified on Netflix, and Vita on Stars, and One Day at a Time on Pop TV, that are all very different, but they're all very creative. They're all Latin centered, and they have some great performances and writing. And, the lead of, one of the most anticipated TV series of last year, The Mandalorian, is Latino, Pedro Pascal. Diego Luna did some amazing work on Narcos Mexico, and indeed that show itself, Narcos Mexico, was a really, really well done piece of work. I don't understand how people like that don't get nominated, and it only happens because the Emmy Academy was so focused on diversity equals Black people that they didn't pay attention to the fact that the largest group of non-white people in America are Hispanics, and they virtually ignored them. So I'm of two minds about the Emmy nominations, because I feel like on the one hand, a lot of people got recognized that should have got recognized. Insecure got its first best TV comedy nomination, long overdue. Long overdue. And two leads, the show's two top characters also nominated. Watchmen, which was this amazing show that took this very beloved, very white-centered graphic superhero novel and recentered it on Black people and Black culture and Black family.
Yeah.
In a way that I think Hollywood still doesn't even realize fully.
Yeah, it hasn't clicked. Yeah,
They hadn't clicked for them. It got the most nominations of any TV show. It got 26.
Very
So
intelligent.
yeah. So that all of that is wonderful, but we can't leave our brown brothers and sisters behind.
Yeah.
And so that's the next thing we got to push for. You got to recognize Latinx people and the great work they're doing in television.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. When we were growing up, I know it was like Siskel and Ebert was the big main movie critics.
Yeah, we loved them. We were like film, like
thumbs
geeky.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah. They used to come on at 1 a.m. in the morning or 11 a.m. I don't know.
It
was a syndicated show, so it would come on at different times depending on where you lived.
Yeah. We were in DC, born and raised, so we would be watching it over there. But what were some people that you kind of like maybe got inspiration from, or are you in the lane on your own and you had to figure it out? Like, who inspired you?
Well, it's a little bit of both. In terms of being a critic, I feel like I had more role models in music because there were a few more Black people writing about music. And so, there's this brother, Leonard Pitts Jr., and I don't know if you're aware of him, but he was a music critic for the Miami Herald. And then he moved into writing like a general interest column some time ago. And so like he got on my radar as just this amazing music writer. He was the kind of music writer I wanted to be. And then he made the same transition that I would make later, sort of saying, writing about music, can feel limiting and can feel like a young person's game. And so he translated into writing a general interest column. And he's just amazing. He's written several books. He wrote a great book about fatherhood called Becoming Dad that I really liked. And so as a wordsmith, as somebody who writes commentary about race and society and pop culture, he's somebody I always pay attention to. Ta-Nehisi Coates, of course, is great in terms of forcing people to rethink things that they've taken for granted about race and American society. So I've always been inspired by him. Whenever I want to up my writing game, I will pick up one of his books. In particular, We Were 8 Years in Power, a collection of his columns that he also kinds of updates with commentary about what he was going through when he wrote the column. I always pick that up, and that always supercharges my writing. I feel like my writing gets better after I read it. But in terms of being like a TV critic, there's not many other Black people doing what I do, and there weren't that many Black people before me, especially doing what I do, which is like I'm trying to become a brand for this. I try to position myself as sort of somebody who thinks deeply about TV and media and pop culture and race and all of this stuff and how it all comes together. And then I put out material on all these different platforms. So, I work for NPR, which is my main job. And so there's radio and a website and occasionally video on that platform. And then I'm a contributor and an analyst for MSNBC. So I'm appearing on shows. I'm appearing on MSNBC shows and on NBC Nightly News occasionally and things like that. And then I also I pop up here and there. I do the PBS NewsHour and things like that. And then I also am a freelance writer. So I've written for The Undefeated and Politico and these other places, Columbia Journalism Review. And then finally, I've written a book and I'm trying to pull together another one. So there's not too many people doing that. So who are Black, on the subject that I'm doing. So I look at somebody like Roland Martin, for example, and I see like how tireless he is, and I see how he is unafraid of anything, and I see how he has just this boundless confidence in himself to achieve, and also a real sort of hard-headed kind of realistic view of the industry and what it takes to achieve what he wants to achieve. And so I'm constantly looking at him for sort of that piece of it. And then I look at, Jason Johnson, or I look at, Joy Reid, and I see people who are really effective, like TV communicators. And so I sort of say, what can I learn from what they're doing to make it part of what I do. And then, like I said, I look to a Ta-Nehisi Coates or Leonard Pitts to see, when I'm pulling together a book, how can I make it effective? How can I write it really well? How can I say something that no one else is saying? So it's almost, you can't look at any one person. I can't look at any one person because what I'm doing, like nobody's doing it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. In a lane of your own. I like. Antonia, can you add me to Zoom? I just got logged out.
Okay. All right, gotcha.
But thank you for naming those people that you glean from. So much we see one person, but knowing that there's like an army of people that help propel them to where they are. So thank you for just honoring that.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm. It's like, is it difficult for you? Okay, if you're in this lane on your own, and you're like just right here in your own path, and then someone and you're like, let's having a discussion with someone, and you're the only one with that point of view and that mindset. Is it difficult to not maybe get your point across, or like try to like have those?
Think that you're crazy because you're the only one thinking that.
Right. Well, it's odd. I've actually noted that when you make your living expressing your opinion, writing columns and things like that, the danger is that you get too used to having supreme confidence in your ideas and what you're saying, and whenever you have a conversation with somebody, you're always dominating it, or whenever you're in a meeting, you're always talking too much, or you're always inflicting your opinion on people. And I learned that from seeing other people who are in the opinion business, and just like being at parties, cocktail parties with them or whatever, and just seeing how they are. And I was just like, man, I don't want to be that. So even though I am like that, unavoidably, I think. So I think the bigger struggle for me, I would think, I mean, there are some people who for whom this is not true, but I would think that it would be torture to be somebody who has a hard time expressing their opinion, but put yourself in a job where that's all you do is express your opinion. Like, that's all I do every day. I go on social media and I express my opinion. I write reviews for NPR where I express my opinion about something. I'm talking to you. I do these kinds of interviews where I express my opinion about something. I write a book where I express. That's all I do. And if I wasn't comfortable doing that, it'd be very hard to be in this position. The thing that's difficult is to figure out what you don't know, figure out what your blind spots are, figure out where your opinions are weak and you are wrong, and be able to admit that, and then sort of metabolize that, take that in and process it, and then come up with a new way of approaching something that sort of acknowledges your own blind spots. Like, that's the hardest thing. The scariest thing about writing my book was when it was first published, because you don't know what you don't know, and so you put out 230 pages of, this is what I think about race and media, and then you have to sit back and wait for the world to tell you how you screwed it up. And fortunately, I didn't have, all the pushback was, ideological nonsense. I didn't have any sort of major problems with the book, but that's the scary part is once you put yourself out there, NPR listeners, by the way, are champions at this. Like, you put yourself out there, they are champions at taking in what you've said and telling you all the ways you did it wrong. So so working at NPR has made me get even better at trying to think through what I'm saying, so that once I put it out there, at least I've thought it through, And if somebody brings up a weak point, I can say, well, I thought about it, but here's why it's like that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And speaking of race baiter, you wrote it in 2012.
Is it? Right on my shoulder.
It was out there in 20.
I always set up my live shots so that you can see that book there. You know what the cover looks like if you want to.
And we got ours. Where's your book?
There you go, right here.
All right. There you go.
Put it in the frame. I can't see it.
Just subliminally in the back of people's hands. You're talking about something totally different.
It's in your head like,
Speaking
of. You're talking about the Boondocks. You're talking about the Boondocks, and people are like, race baiter. That's an interesting book. I wonder why I think that.
Speaking of race baiter, so have you seen, like, you put yourself out there, your thoughts out there, have you seen a progression in journalism when it comes to covering media, or have you seen an awakening or a twinkling of it? Like, what's your
yeah. Things have changed a lot since things have changed a lot, and things have not changed that much. Things have not changed as much as you would have thought. But in some ways things have changed a lot. I think like right now things have changed a lot. Like when the Me Too stories came out a couple of years ago, the way that kind of started is we had these two big exposés of Harvey Weinstein that talked about all of these strategies that he used to allegedly sexually assault and harass young women who wanted to be a part of the film business. And then that started an avalanche of people coming forward and saying, me too, this happened to me too. And, people like Kevin Spacey and Charlie Rose and Matt Lauer, Louis C.K., they were all kind of exposed. Tavis Smiley, they were all exposed in the wake of that. And now what's happened is that we're seeing Black and brown employees come forward at news organizations and say, the racial reckoning needs to come to our newsroom. So, when the New York Times publishes an op-ed from a conservative politician that basically says that Black Lives Matter protests should be put down with military violence, the Black people in the newsroom stand up and say, that is dangerous to Black people. That is dangerous to Black reporters who will be on the scene covering this. It was irresponsible to publish it. And by the way, it didn't even meet the New York Times standards for accuracy. And the next thing you know, that the head of the op-ed section is forced to resign. The Philadelphia Inquirer printed a story that was headlined "All Buildings Matter," and it was a way to try and talk about the toll on buildings that happen when violent protests come through and people, damage buildings.
Wow.
And it wasn't just that headline was terrible, but it came at the end of a legacy of terrible headlines that the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Philadelphia Daily News have become notorious for, headlines that were insensitive to people of color, to Black people, especially in Philadelphia. And so, the people in the newsroom, especially the Black people, stood up and said, this has to stop. This is terrible. How did this get into print? And the next thing you know, the editor-in-chief of the Philadelphia Inquirer had to resign. And we've seen this in many other newsrooms where people have decided they don't care about their position. They don't care about whether they might get sidelined or fired. They are going to speak up about what's going on inside their newsrooms, the racism, the systemic racism inside their own newsrooms, or the systemic racism that's embedded in their coverage. And I think ultimately it's going to make newsrooms better because, people, it's unfortunate, but sometimes people have to be trained by being shown the stick rather than the carrot. And so people have to know that if you authorize publishing a headline as bad as "All Buildings Matter," you can lose your job. If you allow Tom Cotton to write an op-ed that has falsehoods in it that have been disproven by the newspaper's own reporting. And then it turns out that you, as the head of the op-ed section, didn't even read the column before it was published. You can lose your job. And then once you put that example in front of people, then it opens up things so that Black people can voice their concerns, because you can go to a supervisor and say, look, so and so lost his job over this. We really need to talk about it. And then suddenly it's taken more seriously. And the people who are making the decisions, of course, realize that the stakes are higher for them, and they can't just shrug off the reaction of the Black community when they publish something or air something or broadcast something that's just so hurtful and off base. But that's just happening now. That's just happened in the last couple of months. And so it'll be interesting to see how that transforms media, especially once we get past the pandemic and newsrooms can kind of get back to how they normally operate. Everything is so weird for all of us in media because we're all working from home, and a lot of institutions have people furloughed or they've laid people off. They're trying to cover more news for bigger audiences with less people, and everything's just topsy-turvy. So
Thank you for that.
How do you feel about Ellen? Did you hear about the
Yeah, we've been covering it. I this morning I read her publicist sent us the statement from the production company, and also the email that Ellen sent to her staff, saying that she takes responsibility for what happened. We'll see if she actually does. I don't know. I've been covering entertainment for a long time, and it's always been my sense that celebrities are very careful to hire people who either reflect how they want things done, or hire people to do things that they can't bring themselves to do, or that they don't want to bring themselves to do. Right. So there was, for example, I had an experience with another talk show host who I will not name, who was very famous, very well known, and also well known for being kind of a jerk. And what I found was this person surrounded themselves with people who would be jerks on their behalf. So they could be nice to me, and they could be, magnanimous, but the publicists and the executive producer, they were the people who brought the hammer down and said, you only have 5 minutes for an interview, which I was actually told. You only have 5 minutes. What are you going to ask? Well, I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to ask. Well, we don't know if we're going to do the interview. Well, okay. That kind of stuff, so that the star could then come in and be very nice and say, well, 5 minutes? No, you can talk for as long as you want to, which actually happened, right? So there's that, or people hire people who are in their own image. And so they're represented by, they are inclined to hire people because they're simpatico with that person. That person reacts to stress the way they do. That person solves problems the way they do. That person manages people the way they do. So, I have this sort of weird connection to Ellen. I've only met her once, but back not too long after she came out, her mom wrote a book, and I interviewed her mom. I interviewed her mom before the book came out, and then her mom mentioned me in the book. I ran an Ellen at some sort of press thing, and I mentioned that, and we had a little conversation. So I always felt like I had this sort of weird moment. I had this weird moment inside of all the stuff that happened after she came out, because I talked to her mom about the similarities between the struggles that gay people have and that people of color have, and then she remembered that and she put it in her book, and so it became something. But I don't really know her, but I've been observing her from afar as a critic. I wrote a lot about when she came out. I talked to a lot of other gay celebrities about what that process was like. I tried to champion the show even it suffered creatively too after she came out. I mean, I know, I know that there was that she was facing a lot of backlash. I wrote, all of these religious figures took out an ad in the New York Times denouncing her when the episode where she came out happened. It was a long list of people.
Didn't her TV show cancel after that?
Well, what happened was they aired the episode where she came out, and it was this huge event. Oprah was on it, Laura Dern was on it, and it created this huge thing. And then when that season ended, they had to come back the next season and tell stories about this character who had been heterosexual for most of the run of the show, hadn't not even indicated that character was secretly gay.
Wow.
Then came out, then they had to figure out, okay, how do we tell stories with this cast of characters where now all of a sudden this character is gay? And how does she come out to her friends? How does she come out to her family? How does she start dating? All of this stuff they had to negotiate when the show had been set up for an entirely different set of stories and entirely different chemistry. And so I think they struggle with that. And I think they really struggled to make the stories funny. It almost came off as you were getting this treatise on what it's like to come out, as opposed to watching a sitcom, which is what they were making. So even though I agree they faced a lot of backlash and people were incredibly unfair to her and the show did drop in quality. It wasn't as good. And they set the bar really high because the episode where she came out was really good. And then the show comes back and the episodes after that were just not. They paled in comparison. And so anyway, I've been watching her for a long time, and so my sense of her is that she's very smart, that she's very savvy, that she's very protective of her image, and that I don't completely believe that she did not know what was going on. I don't believe it. Now, maybe she didn't know the extent to which people were doing things.
It was kind of like an out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. Maybe.
No, it was a get it done kind of thing. Get it done. And if you get it done, I don't necessarily want to know, because she's smart enough to know what might have to happen to get it done. Now, I'm not saying that I know this for sure. I'm just saying that if you have a results-based evaluation of the people around you, then you don't concern yourself with the details of how things get done. And I think it's very easy for celebrities to settle into that kind of relationship with the people who are around them, because the people around them want to stay in their orbit. They want to stay in that celebrity's good graces. They want to be seen as somebody who's valuable and somebody who brings something to the relationship. And so there's always this pressure for the people who are around the celebrity to constantly be useful to them. And she does have a lot of things going on. She has a lot of different projects in motion and a lot of things that she's involved with. So she doesn't necessarily have time to figure out, how did this executive producer, get this celebrity to come? How did this executive producer get this particular joke written? She doesn't necessarily have the time to investigate all of that. But if your entire intersection with the issue is get it done, then you're setting yourself up for a situation where, and you can tell, I mean, I'm sorry, but you can tell when you're in the presence of somebody who manages by intimidation, even if they're not, it's trying to intimidate you. And I think, in the same way I talked about the Me Too movement and I talked about what's happening in newsrooms, I think in Hollywood right now, we're in a moment where people are coming forward and they're revealing some of the terrible, abusive things that managers are doing to try and meet insane deadlines, to try and create high quality content. And people are refusing to tolerate it. And I think there's this sort of myth in television that, because managing a TV show is such a tremendous thing. If you're the executive producer of a TV show, you are the top executive running a company that employs up to 200, 250 people. And it creates a product that is viewed by millions of people worldwide when it hits the public. And so that's a tremendous amount of pressure. And, it's been accepted, this myth has been accepted in Hollywood, that to create greatness, to give your all, you have to be tortured, and you have to torture all the people who work underneath you. And I don't think that's true. And I think, moreover, it can't be tolerated. And now we're reaching a point where, again, workers are stepping forward and saying, look, I'm not going to sit back and let people do this and not say anything anymore. I'm going to tell my truth. And if enough people lose their fear and are willing to talk to journalists, then these stories get out. And then the executives and the stars are pressured to deal with it, and frankly, create a workplace that is similar to the kind of workplaces that corporations were forced to create, 10 or 15 years ago. There are laws and systems set up to prevent big corporations from managing their workspaces the way that Ellen was alleged to have run, the way that the showrunner who oversaw Hawaii Five-0, Magnum PI, and MacGyver, there was a lot of allegations about how he was abusive, all of these things. So guys, I'm getting here on an hour. I gotta go talk to my editor. Do you have one last question I can answer?
Oh, one last thing. You have yours, Amanda?
Yeah. Really quickly, we're in a pandemic. How are you staying mentally sane and creative at the same time?
You're assuming a lot in that question.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
I think the same part went out the window about a month ago.
How are you staying creative?
Nothing matters anymore.
Exactly.
Nothing matters. Everything.
Exactly.
We're pronouncing the L in salmon now. Okay.
The key is pacing yourself. If you have 3 Zoom calls set up in a day, try to find some time. Like I have this, I live in Florida, so I have this screened-in porch at the rear of my house. And, I just recently spent some time cleaning it out and getting new furniture in there, putting a new door. It's a really nice place to be, especially in the morning when it's not hot. And so part of what I will do is, if I have a bunch of things stacked up, I'll find 10 or 15 minutes, I'll get a cup of coffee, I'll just go out there, and I'll just kind of chill, and I'll just enjoy the nature for a bit. And it allows me to focus my thoughts and settle and gather my energy. And I just don't, I'm not like crouched in front of a monitor for 10 hours. Yeah. I try not to watch cable TV news continuously. Journalists, especially, we got this habit of just putting CNN or MSNBC or, God forbid, Fox News, on a TV in our room, in our office, and just letting it play so that, the minute news breaks, you're aware of it. But, cable news especially is built around conflict. And so if you constantly watch cable news, you are constantly watching. It's like sitting next to somebody who's constantly shaking you. Hey, this thing is happening. Hey.
Yes.
Hey.
Oh my God.
And so after a while, you're just like, you can't help but get agitated if you watch that for too long. And the other thing I love, this happens a lot on TV, is that they're constantly trying to instigate things. So every time Dr. Fauci is on TV, they're like, hey, Donald Trump just called you an idiot. What do you think? Huh? What do you think? What do you think about that? You gonna punch him next time you see him? What do you think?
It's like a game.
Yeah.
All they're trying to do, and Mark Lamont Hill is the latest person to do this on BET, get a quote that then becomes a part of the news cycle. And so everybody talks about you and your show because they're playing the clip and they have to credit you. This is part of the media game. But what it also does is it turns these TV interviews, especially, into just exercises in trying to get someone to make a gaffe, trying to get someone to say something provocative, trying to get someone to say something in conflict with someone else. And when that's your goal, to create conflict, you create television that agitates the viewer when the viewer is watching. Luke,
Oh, your dog.
Sorry.
You
And
ready to
lastly,
get a walk?
thank you for that. Can you tell us where we could find you and where our listeners can look you up? And
Sure. So my website is my name, ericdeggans.com, Deggans. On Twitter, I'm at Deggans, Deggans. If you go to npr.org, you can find my stories. There's a search bar at the top of the website, and if you put in my name, you'll get a landing page that has all the stories in reverse chronological order, with the most recent first and going back, so you can see all the reviews and things that I've done. And my personal website has links to my Facebook fan page, to my Instagram, which is eDeggans, and to my Tumblr page, where I have a few things that I've written that for one reason or another I couldn't get published at NPR, so I just kind of put them on my Tumblr if you want to see them there.
All right. I am so full. This was wonderful.
Well, thank you for asking me to do this. I really appreciate it. I just wish I had more time, but as I told you, Black is King dropped this morning, and my editors called me three times to try and talk about how we're going to cover this thing. So I got to go. But
yes,
yeah, and we're about to go watch it.
It'll be a radio thing. It'll probably be on All Things Considered, either Saturday or Sunday. Yeah, I feel a little weird.
Get the inside scoop. How do you like it?
Oh yeah, I love it. I love it so far. I've been consuming it slowly because I'm recording pieces of it, and I'm taking notes on the visual imagery, and it's very dense in that way. But I sort of said that Beyonce knows how to tell Black America what we need to hear when we need to hear it. And when we needed the militancy, she came with the Black Panther stuff. She came with the big afros and the militancy. And now I think we need to hear that we matter, that we are connected to the Great March of History in the same way that all great peoples are. And the beginning of the album, the visual album, is very much centered on that. And it feels like a message that we need to hear right now.
Thank you so much.
So yeah, you'll have to tell me what you think after you see it.
I will, and I'll put my thoughts, put my TV critic hat on.
That's right. There you go. All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna have to split now.
All right. It was so lovely.
Send me a link when it comes out, and I'll put it out on all my social media platforms.
I definitely will. Peace and blessings.
Thank you. See you guys later.
Bye.
Thank you. Well, that concludes our segment with Mr. Eric